Good evening, everyone. This is the regular meeting, the first February regular meeting of the Windham Southeast School District, Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021. The meeting has been officially warned, and I have to let a few more people in, but we can get started on the consent agenda. First business will be for a motion to approve the consent agenda for the warrants of January 4th, 2021, the warrants for January 11th, the warrants for January 19th, the warrants for January 25th, and payrolls for December 31st, 2020, and January 15th, 2021. Could I have a motion and a second for the consent agenda? Oh, I'm sorry, we also have to approve the minutes of January 19th and January 26th.
I move that we approve the minutes and the warrants.
Thank you, Thomas. Second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Liz. Moved and seconded to approve the warrants as presented. All in favor or any discussion?
Yeah, I could say a couple of things. I went through all the warrants today, and once again, there's quite a bit of error handling things being done to the tune of close to $50,000. We paid our association bill for the 3 pieces of property that we own in Brattleboro, and I noticed there's about a $40,000 replacement for a boiler in Dummerston that we've been talking about, so that's been done. So that's about it. It's interesting to go through the warrants as always, sort of get a big overview of the finances, and my hat's off to the financial people who do a great job.
Thank you, Sean, and I'll second that. I know it doesn't sound like it's an interesting thing to do, but it's kind of enlightening to see some of the things we buy, like colanders. Who'd have thunk? But anyway, we have a motion, and it's been seconded to approve the minutes of January 19th and January 26th, 21, and the 5 warrants and 2 payrolls as presented. All those in favor, please indicate by unmuting and saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, the ayes have it, and the consent agenda is approved. Next is communications. We had correspondence this week. Oh, gotta let somebody else in. We had correspondence this week regarding specials instruction in our schools of art, phys ed, music, and things. And it included some personally identifiable information. So we will take it up in executive session. I just wanted to say that we are concerned about it. We want to ensure that our learners are sharing a rich all-around experience, even during a world pandemic. So that was a communication from this week. Administrative report. Andy, you want to give us an update on the in-person operations?
Yeah, we had our students come back. It was like the first day of school, part 2 last week. I stopped by Academy School on Thursday to see the arrival of just the wonderful flow of traffic in and out of Academy School. And I know it sounds crazy to say that, but there is just something magical about seeing a line of cars and students arriving to school. It looks like a lot of movement, but just the controlled level of order and flow, but seeing the smiley, happy faces of students and parents and staff as we were welcoming our students back to 4 days a week. So right now, where it stands, all our K through 6 schools are back to 4 days a week of in-person learning. BAMS is back to 4 days a week of in-person learning. Dummerston and Putney middle schools are anticipating going to 4 days or trying to go to 4 days, depending upon staffing needs that they're working on addressing for after February vacation. And we think that should be possible. BUHS has started the conversation around moving to 2 days a week of of in-person learning after the February break. So that was the thrust of the return. While this is going on, our focus is now turned towards what does recovery planning look like. Recovery planning, from what we know, is going to fall into three kind of larger buckets. One around mental health and well-being, the second engagement and truancy, and the third one academic success. And we are going to start doing some of that small group work in the coming weeks to anticipate what the requirements from the Agency of Education are going to be, but we want to get a jump on that so that we can align that work with our continuous improvement plan development and structuring of how things will look coming into the year. So not a lot to talk about, but it was a wonderful day to see the enthusiasm. I toured Putney and Dummerston on Wednesday prior to kids arriving, and the level of excitement and the care that's been taken into those facilities, for instance, to get ready. Same thing with BAMS. The attention that's been paid to bringing this back on is nothing short of remarkable. So it was a good feeling couple days.
Great. You had shared a sort of an update on the practice that you decided to follow as far as notifying the board about infections. And I wonder if you could just briefly go over that again for us and see if any board members, we haven't ever talked about it. We can't talk about it except in
Sure.
meetings.
So when we had our first COVID case, this was back, and it was, gosh, it seems like it could have been November when we had our first COVID. With the first COVID case, it was alarming. We had steered clear of that. We had developed the COVID dashboard on the website, but didn't have any reason to populate it. And so we had notified everyone across the whole district. So if there were a case at the high school, for instance, and families had a first grader in Putney, they still received the same notification of, here was this, there was a positive case within our district, and we're just letting you know. Based upon feedback that we've received from our school health liaison, our COVID coordinator, from some parents, that level of number of emails and correspondence was one, it was kind of anxiety provoking and many, because we were inundated with this information so frequently. And it also creates a certain amount of numbness of, oh, here comes another school notification, or here's another school notice. So we decided to make the transition away from notifying the whole district with regards to a positive case in one school. So we're focusing on the way the communication tree will go is those classrooms are connected and notified. The school community itself is notified. So the classroom and the schools are still assisting with contact or quarantine notification, and that line, using the line tracing process. The schools will notify the whole school community, and then we place that information on our COVID dashboard. I have since started to place some information in the weekly updates to families as well to make sure that they're aware. What I will do is make sure I'm forwarding the emails as I receive them from the schools to the board to say, hey, this is where, just so that you're aware, not having to check every week. So we adjusted and tweaked the process a little bit to be mindful of the digital overload that people are receiving, but also be really cautious about not creating a heightened sense of anxiety, or kind of having that unintended consequence of heightening anxieties and stressors about the situation.
Great, thanks, Andy. Any thoughts from the board about that? That's a pretty comprehensive update, and I just wanted to get that out on the table so everybody would understand, how it's supposed to work. I think the biggest concern is misinformation, but it sounds like if that happens, it's because somebody didn't understand rather than they didn't get the information. Yep.
Yeah, it's in
Any
some of our.
comments?
In some of our, and I'll just, in some of the, like what you mentioned earlier too, David, sometimes there's that person identifiable information that if we release too much, it might be kind of indicative of who the person might be, or is this a teacher or a student? So sometimes it's just really important. So when we communicate that there's an infectious case, we say it's within our learning community, and we go to great lengths to communicate that it's not a student or a staff member, but we just say a member of our learning community. And
Yeah,
so
that's adequate.
that's also why.
Yeah, that's certainly adequate. Any thoughts or comments from the board? Or the public for that matter, or administration? I don't see any, so let's see. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to also clarify was the information and data requests. I think Andy made a, not sure what the right word is, a life preserver determination that if people have data requests, probably the best thing is to send them to me so that they don't, so Andy doesn't have to find them in his email box. And if it's something that can be responded to quickly, even if you are asking a principal or you want to ask Frank, or you need information about something, if it's something that can be done quickly, then I think it's reasonable to expect a quick response. If it's something that's more involved or involves really something that the whole board would want to talk about, I think it's reasonable to expect us to do it that way. So I don't want to go too far into too much detail, but I know that I sent two pretty time-consuming ones, and there, some of the questions and the conversations around the town meeting warnings also took up quite a bit of it, was taking up a lot of administrative time. And so if somebody comes along and innocently asks for some number that might take a half an hour to find, and it's like, God, give me a break. So we're going to give them a break. So again, if there's something you want to know, you can ask, certainly you can contact Andy. There's no restriction on that. But I would prefer you to contact me first, and I'll see if I can find out or do it in the course of my regular communications with Andy, as opposed to filling up the administrative email boxes. Don't hesitate to ask, and don't hesitate to seek information or have things on the agenda. Just try to be a little easy on it. So, Emily?
David, I just wanted to let you know that there's a lot of feedback on your mic.
There's a lot of feedback on my mic.
I think it's something.
Oh, okay. Thank
letting
you.
know.
I know what to do.
Thanks.
Thank you, David. And I
That should
think
be better.
sometimes it will sound counterintuitive, but sometimes the easiest request, what sounds like an easy request, could actually be kind of chunky and time consuming just because of the number of different steps. And that's partly how the systems. And so David and I had emailed back and forth a couple times. In the future, it might be helpful for someone like Paul to share, or for us to share what are our data sources that we have, and then how do we compile information so that can kind of orient, what do we have at our fingertips and our disposal, so that when we want to pull things, it will just orient us better around what we're working with and what we're working upon.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any. Okay, we'll move on to the fiscal report. Frank's going to give us a whole bunch of good news.
Okay. So it's not an extensive report, but I do think we have some good news to share. And David, if I could do that screen share.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Okay.
There you go.
So one of the good news is general forecast for revenues. I think that was one of our topics on the agenda. This is from the Joint Fiscal Office, and it's the Education Fund outlook that we are obviously dependent upon for fiscal year 22, depending on what voters approve. And basically what this is, I don't think we're going to want to get into too much detail, but this is a document that indicates that projected revenues are coming in stronger than what was projected back by the tax commissioner in December that set that yield number. So I did want folks to be aware that after the last board meeting, because of this kind of data that's coming in, and the most important number on this sheet is right here, the 1, 2, 3, the fourth number down. We talked about using 10,998. The tax commissioner had said a forecast that he knew was incomplete 10,763. House Ways and Means Committee voted 11,239, or actually they voted a number that's similar to that, not exactly that. So that is very good news when we bring that back to tax impact estimates. So I'll do another share of the document that we put in subsequent to last meeting. We put a version of this document into the annual report. So this is one of the pages in our annual report that summarizes our budget of 52,103,000. There's that 1.8%. This is the number the House Ways and Means Committee voted, 11,385. And then David, subsequent to having contacted you and Andy and say, hey, should we use the 11,385 or go with still the old number that we had, we agreed in the annual report to put 11,385 in. And then David, subsequent to that, just yesterday, or maybe it was, yeah, I think it was yesterday, James gave us another update of equalized student, which is, it was up another 7 or 8 students. So those changes, and keep in mind, these are all estimates, so there's no reason to be concerned about the warning or any other documents. They're all estimates. They're going to change again. But the bottom line is we're now looking at a 1.1% reduction in the equalized tax rate. And when the yield goes up, our tax rate goes down because it's comparing our number 19,392 against the legislature's number of 11,385, and it's just dividing those two numbers. 19,3 divided by 11,3 equals $1.70. That's how you get a tax rate. So, and then when we apply CLA, which is, from a homestead tax point of view, it's an unfavorable change this year, where you see right off the bat, the CLA would be adding these percentages to the tax rate. This would be up 2%, and so on. When we apply those, our 1.1 equalized $1.70 gets turned into these numbers, which are very modest changes. They're very similar to current year. So from a fiscal responsibility, affordability point of view, these are very favorable developments that appear to be solid. They're not, as far as I can tell from discussion at the legislative level, they're not stretches. So the other topic that was on the agenda I was going to speak to just briefly is the CARES Act and the what's now referred to as the ESSER grant funding. There are 2 rounds of this ESSER grant funding. The first round was available from the first congressional CARES Act, but it really wasn't implemented until January 2021. So that's the grant that Andy and I, the leadership team, Paul Smith, we're working on diligently now to create a grant application that's due to the Agency of Ed later this month, that will outline the strategies intended to be used to improve educational outcomes. And that's a very broad statement. I can give you some general parameters that we have on a preliminary level. It's $1 million. There's an ESSER 1, and then there's an ESSER 2 that we have not received any real guidance on. Andy could speak a little bit more to that than I, but on this ESSER 1, about $1 million on the preliminary level. We see about 750,000 of that as being associated with personnel that responds to a variety of these priorities around helping students recover on the academic loss of learning as a result of the pandemic. Also, support for continued COVID coordination, and also would include instructional coaches, education support team coordinator, and those are really, particularly education support team coordinator is part of it's part of a law that we're required to have implemented as we prepare to implement Act 173. So lion's share personnel largely associated with supporting academic improvement, and another 100,000 in what we would expect continued investments in PPE as we work through the vaccine and requirements for separation and social distancing, and then another approximately 150,000 in various technology investments that either we tried to acquire in the first round of the CARES Act funding, but the vendors were not able to deliver, and therefore it has to go into this second round. The delivery cutoff was December 31st, and or new purchases that were that have been contemplated. So there's an overview of about $1 million in spending. As I say, we need to get this grant application to the Agency of Ed really as early within a couple of weeks. And the structure of that is unlike the first round. It's much more rigid in terms of we log into a system and we have to develop strategies that say how we're going to affect outcomes. The Agency of Ed reviews each strategy along with the spending proposal, and then either approves it or says, no, this is not consistent with the grant criteria, or we don't think it's going to be effective, and they ask us to amend. So we'll go through that process in the next few weeks, and the final grant application has got to be complete in mid-March. So that's ESSER 1, and ESSER 2. Andy, I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, but it will actually be a similar amount of money that goes out into fiscal year 24, and we understand that the Agency of Ed will have key investment themes that they expect districts to follow to address, again, this recovery from the pandemic.
Yeah, I think just to echo what you were saying with the themes, it goes into those three larger buckets with an emphasis as well on literacy and early literacy. And so some of those kind of pre-K through 3 age ranges, pre-K 2, pre-K 3, having a focus on early intervention for students, and an early focus on literacy growth as well to dovetail into that work.
Frank, I can't remember which committee it was I was watching, and when they got the report on the second ESSER, but they talked about it being 3.5 to 4 times as much money in this round. Is that, you said that it's the same amount of money, that means the same amount of money for the things that were in the first ESSER, but there are additional things in the second ESSER, or will there be more money for things like, the things you just listed?
Well, I do hope to hear more about that, and I'm hearing similar things, that there is more money. I'm hoping to hear about funding for indoor air quality. We identified a number of things that could not could not be manufactured and installed by that December 31st deadline. So I've got shovel-ready projects ready to go. There has been some reference to that being a possibility, but I have not heard any guidance on that specifically. Yeah, other than that, the only thing that I've received any communication from the Secretary of Ed at this point is this ESSER 2, which is following the Title I allocation criteria, and that's how we're coming up with another $1 million. That's about our Title I allocation. So it still remains an estimate.
Well, it's good news, however much it is. Another question, I didn't realize that about the EST Education Support Coordinator. Is that a position that the grant will pay for the first year and then the district picks it up, or is that something that's going to be done regionally?
That's a position we talked about running through the SU, and that the grant would pick it up, and we would look at, really there's a heavy lift in terms of establishing. I mean, all our schools have an EST plan in place, but we don't have a district level view of that. So we had talked about this being initially funded through the grant, and we would look at where is this, where we can find the ways to fund that locally if necessary once the grant and the funds sunset. I think if I'm capturing that accurately, Frank.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They're not requiring that we add that position in perpetuity. It's more of a transition expectation. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, the function is required, and the question of, as Andy is saying, how do we initially establish the functionality within our school districts? Definitely is new. There is no, as Andy said, there is no central coordination for that work now. So this is just terrifically helpful to have grant funding and that be eligible under this CARES Act transition. But yeah, the function will need to be sustained. I think that this funding that we're looking at it goes through fiscal year 24, and for fiscal year 25, I would think we would be able to see how potentially retirements and other transitions that are normal in over the course of a school year allow us to integrate that into the local budget without a substantial negative impact. But yeah, we are concerned about avoiding a fiscal cliff when this money goes away. So that's very much on our mind, that we are not stacking up programs that we absolutely rely on for daily operations that are dependent on $2 million or $1 million of federal grant money that then just goes away. So we're being very, very careful about how things will transition back into the local budget.
Thanks. Sean mentioned all the the variety of things that you see in the warrants, and something you see a lot of is just an astonishing degree of professional development going on, and an astonishing array of things that people are studying and degrees that they're working toward. And I think that it might be, well, I'm sure you're already thinking about this, but it might be really useful to get a head start on using some of this money to bring in consultants or bring in people that can really build on the kinds of things that we need to be doing for 1 year. Because the other thing that happens in 23, if I've got they update the chart, the timeline regularly, but the Act 173 implementation, I think for FY23, that's the first block grant, but for most districts, and ours, I think, is one of them, the block grant is the same as the previous year's special ed disbursement. And then in 24, we get the block grant based on census rather than the number of special needs students. So it's a double cliff that money would be gone. Plus we would, I think it's reasonable to expect less unless from that block grant, unless the weighting formula implementations help us. But
Right.
we've got a couple of really good years, and then who knows? It really is not. And we're gonna be right back where we were, only maybe worse. So we need to be pretty thoughtful about how we spend this money right now when we can buy things that are gonna save money in the long run.
Well, and we do want to keep in mind, we're still in the realm of about 2% of our operating budget, right? $1 million is about 2% of 50 million. So the good news is it's not 10%, because
Right.
that is really dramatic. But 2% still is absolutely a measurable impact on a tax rate from one year to the next. So yeah, it's just important to keep in mind that we are in the realm of 1 to 2%. And at this point, the worst case on the special ed funding transition, it just happens to be that we spend about the average amount in the state on special ed per student. So for those districts, if there's no weighting adjustment, we won't see a dramatic shift there. But if there is a weighting adjustment, we'll get more money.
Great, thank you. It's really complex, and trying to talk about it a little bit at a time is a lot easier than trying to figure it all out in the end. Great, thank you. Any questions for Andy or Frank on any of this, or any ideas for where? Well, I guess we'll wait to brainstorm ideas for where to spend all the money until we find out a little bit more about what we need. Ann.
Thank you, Dave. Frank, would you please forward a copy of your tax impact statement to Dave so he can send it to the rest of us?
I absolutely will. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I did want to mention that Barb has forwarded the annual report proof to the printer, so it is on its way, and we'll have a complete annual report up on the website. And she may have actually already put the proof up on the website, but it will be available relatively soon. And that page is in there.
Okay, I guess we're seeing no hands up. We'll move on to committee reports. Correct. And the first thing is leadership councils. And from the agendas, it looks like only the Green Street Leadership Council met since our last meeting. Jackie, were you able to go?
Hi, yep, I was able to go, and it was a really, really great meeting. We talked a lot about what it's been like getting the kids back in school and some really different exciting projects that they have going on. They're actually installing a greenhouse as a safe space for a mask break for the kids, but then in the future, they're going to use it as part of the garden program, and it just seems like I'm just really excited about that. And we talked a lot about the vote, the possibility of dissolving the district, and got some feedback about that. And we also talked a lot about the Tulip Trot, which is Green Street's giant fundraiser every year. Last year, they did a virtual Tulip Trot, which was really did well. And this year, they're doing the most creative thing that I've ever heard of, which is going to be an online Tulip Trot / musical. So it's going to be Tulip Trot the musical, and there's various ways for all the kids to participate. And it's and they're starting to gather sponsors, and it just seems like it's going to be even more exciting than last year. So a lot of time was dedicated to that, but I'm super pumped about it now, and I think everybody is.
It's infectious. It really is kind of amazing.
Yeah. And I might be missing some other important details if Mark wanted to say anything that I missed. I really got wrapped up in the Tulip Trot excitement, so if I missed anything major, my apologies.
Yes, you're forgiven. Mark, anything to add?
No, I think Jackie characterized the meeting very well.
Great, thank you.
No
Sean.
Yeah, the Guilford Leadership Council met on the 22nd, and there were 10 people in attendance. And once again, we had the board report, and we did talk about some of the items that are coming up for to be on the ballot on the 2nd of March. And then John, once again, did the whole overview of the bewitching day of the 28th, when there was more students involved in the school. And it was a good meeting. Our meeting usually lasts a little bit more than an hour. And they had Beth gave an overview of the parent forum that they had on the 20th of January. And there were 24 individuals who were at that parent forum. And they felt as if, there's some good questions. And Beth got some compliments from the rest of the leadership council and the organizational bit that she'd done around that parent conference discussion, the open forum. And we're going to have, on February 18th, we will have the pre-town meeting, and the Guilford Leadership Council will be giving a presentation at that. I'll be at that meeting also. And the next Guilford Leadership Council meeting is February 5th, so this Friday at 1 o'clock. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I apologize I looked at the February 5th and then didn't look down to see the January 22nd, so I didn't realize you had met. Thanks. And Mariah's here. Mariah, anything on early? Oh, Michelle, you have a question? Leadership Council comment?
Yeah, we missed getting to do an update last month because Julianne wasn't here, nor was I. But did you want me to share about the liaison, parent liaison tonight, or save it for another time that we had talked about what Dummerston's doing their leadership council?
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, I assumed there would be a leadership council meeting time to do it. That would be great.
Yeah, our leadership council meets actually not until this Thursday, but this came up in conversation and David wanted me to share, and Julianne would probably describe it all better. But the leadership council had, I think a lot of our schools have talked about ways to kind of bridge the gap and the disconnect in our community of having some kids doing remote and different days of cohorts. And so the plan came to be that there would be a parent liaison that represented each class to sort of help unify and connect family, like all of the families, no matter where you were getting your education. And so, it started with finding a volunteer for each class. And then we had a meeting, and actually our school counselor, Erica Garnett, did like an informative session and gave us an overview of ways that she could support families, some resources so that we had information so that if we saw themes coming up or needs in families, that we have a little awareness of what's out there and could maybe help someone or point them in the right direction. So everyone kind of came together over the holidays. Rough time to start. I think all the classes are kind of starting off slowly. We've had some introductory meetings where parents just do a meet and greet and start brainstorming. And the idea is that these families could all work together to think about activities like a cocoa party or a pen pal, letter exchange with their classmates or something like that. But I was really impressed. One of the classes just took off and had a really great start. And that class had already identified some needs in their class and was able to help direct some families to the Everybody Eats program and support them in finding some food and, like those types of services. So yeah, it's already, as far as I'm concerned, it's already been a win, like a success when you already have people that's found some support and assistance. So I don't know, Julianne, if you have anything else you want to contribute, but it's been a positive thing and something that's other schools, might want to put on their radar, depending on, now we're all coming back together, but
Thanks so much, Michelle. No, that was a great description. I think, we talked a lot in that parent liaison meeting about how we're just missing, even for the families who are in person, and of course the families who are fully remote, we're missing that time where we can gather in the parking lot and families coming into the school building and some of the informal conversations that we would have, outside while we're waiting for the students to be dismissed or in the morning. And it's, you know, month after month, this is going on and this is continuing. And the level of isolation we all feel is real, you know, as parents. So partly this was a response to that, to try to figure out how can we build in just opportunities for connection for people that can be very informal. It can really be tailored to what people are comfortable with and what they want. So thanks, Michelle, for bringing that up to the group. Appreciate it.
And Michelle, just to sort of to clarify, this is completely separate from the school and the school board. The notices went out to the school, is it correct? The notices went out to the school mailing list, and then the people put each other in touch with each other and set up a Facebook page.
Right. It was brainstormed in the leadership council, but the parent liaisons are just someone representing each class, and they're figuring out the best way to do that. We've just now started to coordinate just an email list. Like, we don't have parent contacts, and that is such a big deal. And for my class, I'm a parent liaison for my youngest child's class. I created a private, you know, invite only Facebook page, just so that we have a forum. Not everybody's on Facebook, but just so that there's a space to connect and easily communicate. And, you know, is it really pajama day, or is my kid, you know, playing me? That kind of stuff. So I think I see, you know, dreaming past COVID, that it's just, this is such a great thing to start with. Especially, I'm doing one of the younger grades. All of the families are new. They don't have connections. They don't have relationships with the other families. And this started in kindergarten for these, you know, for me, it's a first grader. So just the idea of having something that doesn't have to end when everyone comes back, and still having this sense of community in each of the classrooms, as our kids, you know, many of them will be in school together for years to come. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a really good thing. So.
Sounds terrific. I hope that other schools will do it. Great, thank you. So, Mariah, I ask again, is any updates from early ed? I noticed I got a couple of notices from Head Start this last week or so, but any developments?
We're counting a few more students. The good news with everyone, with the K through 6 going back 4 days, more parents are calling and interested in getting kids into pre-K programs. So looking forward to numbers increasing for the fall.
Terrific, thank you. And I believe the only other committee that met is Communications Council. So Michelle again.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Did you call? I was telling my kids to be quiet, and that you caught me right in the worst moment. Just so you called on the Communication Council? Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't have an alternative either. It's the only committee that met since
oh, it is.
meeting.
Okay, that's the day. The time I jump up, and it's a good time to tell them to be quiet, though. Okay, so the Communication Council met on January 20th. And we had an opportunity to have Barb attend our meeting. It was important. It gave us a chance to identify the roles that we all play, find out how you know, central office could support us with clerical needs, protocols, review protocols for press releases, and just really what's okay to ask of them, and how we can work together. And they're able to help us a lot more than we knew, and that's wonderful because it just makes everything easier and to implement. So one of the things that we were able to address right then and there with her, and that the committee has worked on, is the creation of the board and committee email subscription list. So far that's been shared through Facebook, and through Andy included it in one of his parent update letters, superintendent update. So we've had about 100 people sign up for various committees and board meetings. I was anticipating that principals would have gotten word to also distribute that and try to do a push through their school communities to keep on spreading that. And we have a plan Central office will process the data, and then it's going to be something that we share yearly and update so that new families and as people change and their interests change, the list can be updated. We also addressed and decided that although the Communication Council is WSESD, that there's ways that we could integrate and support communication for the SU, and also Vernon, as a lot of their families have, they have kids at BAMS and BUHS. But the SU, there's definitely a desire from our communities because that's where our special education reports come into, and people want to know about these meetings. And ultimately representing that or supporting communication is really just about creating events and sharing those SU meetings, the schedule. And as far as working with Vernon, we're just gonna keep them, have a contact person. They'll be in charge with what they want to distribute, but we'll just keep them in the loop with what we're doing so that they have the opportunity to distribute it down to their community too. What's next? We did a lot. We've been doing a lot. The SU this is website improvement. The SU it's come up to, from what started with the Communication Council talking about improvements on our website to make it more user-friendly, has, evolved into actually the district or the supervisory union looking at just completely changing and replacing our website. And so we had Carrie Amadon came to our meeting, and we kind of talked about what the SU will be navigating and what the Communication Council could do to support that development. And so, our focus is going to be to identify community needs and what people are using the website for. And again, I know I've asked board members in the past, but we are looking at our leadership councils to help us gather that information and identify. The more perspective we get on why people are coming to the website, the better. So if you can keep plugging that in your leadership council and sending us back information, that would be helpful. And then we started the conversation around as of January 20th. The dissolution vote was just a possibility. We hadn't had any confirmation. None of the towns had approved it. So it was just a lot of brainstorming about, how we might represent it. What are people going to want to know? How do we work through this? What would a plan be? And we basically decided that we needed to have meetings just for this. This is just a huge topic. And so, so that's going to roll us into, then we met on, when was it? January 29th. So this has been like, it's been like a rolling process, because as we get information to clarify our role in where confines our ability to communicate with the public, that's impacting some of the work that we've done and talked out. And it's been really great. We've had a couple board members show up, and it's just been really nice to feed off each other, because, 1 week an idea sounds really good, and the next week we're like, actually, that's not really our place. That maybe that's too subjective. And our goal is simply to make sure that we are presenting objective facts that are specific to the vote and the process. And that's pretty much it. So, so now I have to look at my notes. So let's say we just yesterday got confirmation that Guilford also added these articles. So now all 4 communities will have the 2 article questions. If their community wants to leave the WSESD, and then the other one is, do they want to approve and ratify the other town's decision? It's been a ton of work just identifying the process and going through the statutes to make sure that we understand, so that we're representing things as accurately as possible. We're looking at this from an approach of really just some really basic information. I mean, there's been feedback where there's just been confusion about even what is going to be on the ballot. What is the ballot question? So just looking at what am I presenting to voters, the idea is we want to create just an information sheet that is, what am I voting for? What am I voting on? What does that vote mean? What changes might happen versus what would stay the same? And that's where things start getting tricky. It's really easy to identify like services through the SU. But just so much, there's so much information that would be site specific, and there's so many possibilities of what ifs and where things could go depending on the outcome of the votes, that it is really tricky, and it's going to be something that the towns really need to take up upon themselves, and the individual school communities need to be talking about, versus our role as the board handing information over. So let's say so again, we're trying to focus on sort of identifying what would be unique to a district, an independent district, versus what shared services we have. There's lots of questions about how we might be able to address the impact, the changes that would come if we were not a one employer district. So by being a merged district, we've been able to really work with COVID accommodations for our remote needs, and have, meet the needs of our teachers and students remotely. So we're trying to identify, there's not a clear timeline, but we're trying to identify, if there's any information that's solid, that we would know if it would lead to an independent district, working with just their teacher population to meet COVID needs, because that's something that everyone wants to hear about. We're trying to address, what does the dissolution process look like? And just to review, in case anyone's not up on that, basically, if a town, well, I'll just work with one, I'll assume it's one. If a town were to leave, were to vote, and then the neighboring communities approved and ratified that vote, it's not a done deal at that point. At that point, it still has to be approved by the school board, the school board of ed, and they have a hearing with all of the towns to identify if this is in the best interest of the school, students, and remaining towns that are still a merged district. And so it ultimately comes down to their approval. The timeline is also something we're again, and this is where we're defining our role, because we were hoping that maybe we could take some stress off for people and prolong the dissolution process. And I think that's something we have to still think about as a board, if we have any place to do that before or after the vote. But the timeline is pretty simple. It's established by the State Board of Ed, and it's really the only the contingent is just the financial considerations. There needs to be so we're trying to identify, basically there needs to be financial agreement with the district, a district that left and the district that has been part of. And so there's costs that would be absorbed by the SD through the dissolution process. And then the town we'd have to have a financial agreement that and this is again where we don't want to just start throwing out what ifs, but some of the costs that could be absorbed, that would need to be reimbursed back to the SD, would be costs around the election expenses, around moving bonds and debts and fees, reestablishing accounts, administrative things, because the schools would have to set up new accounts with the vendors that we use. Repayment of long-term investments, capital plan contributions, any debts that were paid off, tuition for students that are in different schools, whether it's because they did a school of choice and are like in BAMS, but they live in Dummerston or something, or BUHS. So, I think depending on how complicated that gets could influence the timeline. And there's just, again, I'm really just sharing this so that board members and everyone here has a bigger picture, because I'm not clear on, we don't have a final plan on exactly what the Communication Council is going to outline and distribute. And when we do that, we'll come back and we'll present it to the board before anything were to move forward. Let's see. So the outreach plan is basically sort of coming up with an informative flyer that would kind of do these cut and dry black and white issues. And we'll show it to you guys. I anticipate leadership council representation. It's an opportunity for teachers and administrators and a board member in the community to come together and to talk about more site specific things. And so that would be, it's important, that board members are present for that. I think there's going to be a lot of questions coming from your community. And I know an issue is just raised about two, though, that I think we might need to cover, that leadership councils are subcommittees of the board, and that so we do have to still be mindful of what we're representing, because this is not a school board vote. The towns are actually going to be responsible for a public informational hearing. We've reached out and offered to collaborate and help, although now it's not as clear if that's permissive, but we were being proactive and reached out to see if, towns wanted to collaborate efforts, that they would be prepared. I know Dummerston had requested, they put out a newsletter for their community about town meeting, and well, it's a quarterly newsletter, but this next one was coming out before town meeting, but the deadline was last Saturday and we were just unprepared. We had 2 days notice. So we've kind of missed some of those windows. But so that is pretty much, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. I could talk about this for a long time, but our next meeting is Thursday. I think we'll be meeting on a weekly basis at 1 o'clock. Anyone is welcome to come and contribute. And again, we're just mostly still, picking things apart and just really focusing on our objective, which is to share facts about the dissolution vote process. And that's sort of what we're trying to outline and stick to, is as our limits of how much we can contribute and share with the public. Does that sound right, David?
Yeah,
It's a lot.
yeah. I just want to reemphasize again that the sort of one consensus I think the committee came to was that we really had to stick with the things that we knew were facts. Like, we know that special ed is through the SU, so that won't change. Other things will change, but just really things that we were absolutely certain would be different or wouldn't be different. The rest of it, there's just so much that's up to interpretation or what might happen, which nobody knows what might happen. No matter what the decision is, nobody knows what might happen. So we're just trying to be really careful, which I'm very grateful for. Ruby, can you want to add something?
I had a question actually, Michelle, because something you said has an impact, I feel like, on our leadership council and probably others. You mentioned something about, I just want to understand what this means, being a subcommittee of the board. And by the way, I'm Ruby McAdoo from Putney Central School. Sorry about that. Because we've shared, as a leadership council, we've shared some of our kind of draft documentation for what we're envisioning as a resource that might help the Putney community to make a vote. And my understanding, or at least my thinking about that, was that we weren't needing to get approval or run it by you. We want to make sure it's accurate and we want to, share it with other leadership councils in the event that it's helpful. And we would like to hear what they say so that we can all kind of, create stuff that's helpful for us. But that what you said about a subcommittee was confusing to me. And so I want to understand kind of what that means.
Yeah, and that is information that's landed in my lap in the last 2 hours, actually, as we're clarifying. I mean, there's been so many meetings and questions, and so we are really trying to outline our responsibility and what we could share, and to not overstep. I mean, it's really important. It's a legality issue. I mean, we can't do it wrong. And so, that objective would apply to, I think, and I really would almost like to bring this back to Andy, because he helped us get some consult from legal. But that objective of we can share facts about the dissolution vote is basically sort of our parameters. When it starts getting into, it's going to be tricky. I would imagine that your leadership council, that members of your community might come with questions and want to have conversations about things like capital plans and things like that. And I don't think that conversation is, I'm anticipating those conversations in my leadership council. But I think when it comes to like distribution, it's just, that's sort of the parameters, is what are the facts about this dissolution vote? Like, and I think that the format that you had sort of started was excellent and something that we're all going to utilize. That's sort of what am I voting on? What does it mean? What changes? What doesn't? I mean, I don't. There wasn't really anything. It's just being very, very careful of speculative or subjective information, and that's a little tricky. It is a little tricky. I don't think that. I would hope not impinge on conversation, but just if you're going to be distributing to your community, I know you were working on such a cool flyer, like just being mindful of that objective. And Andy could add 2 cents if he has anything else, if I'm not saying this well. But I was just seeking clarification to make sure that we as board members are not in any way overstepping in what this is not a school board issue, it's a town issue. So there's some limitations there. That's all to be mindful of.
Yeah, I think the update Andy gave us from the attorney is that the board, if the board wanted to take a position on this, we could do that. But individually or representing a position, or for like the Putney Leadership Council to make a recommendation one way or another, could be problematic. And the other thing that I think is important is that as school board members, the things that we say, we can say, well, this is my opinion, it's not what the board says, but it's hard for people to pick that apart. And people, myself very much included, tend to hear what they want to hear. And if they want to hear a school board member saying this or that, that's what they're likely going to hear. So it's really, we have to be really careful. I think that, you know, what, as Michelle said, the document that Ruby's working on is fine. I mean, there's probably some editing, but basically that's exactly what, you know, the committee's going to adopt, because it's got the important information and it doesn't suggest one thing or another. And most importantly, it doesn't try to project the future, which is just beyond dangerous. It's foolish. So Andy, anything specifically that Sean mentioned that you want to add?
No, I
don't have to.
Yeah, I know. I think you captured most of it. I think Ruby had a question about the leadership councils being subcommittees, and it really just refers to the powers that are enumerated to the school board under statute. And so in statute, there are some really distinct powers and authorities, and David's been so good to share many of them. Since I've been on board, and just kind of helping educate the board and the public about what those powers are. Forming committees is one of those, or designating work to a committee is one of those functions of the board. And so anything kind of that the board's kind of indicated that this is, or an attachment to the board, one might perceive that as kind of a subcommittee of, you know, just like a different committee like the PPEC or the Diversity and Equity Committee or a different group of the Finance Committee. It becomes a subcommittee of the board, and so that the board's able to fulfill their function under that, what is it, David, 16 VSA 564, I think?
Could be. I can put it on the screen if you want to look at it.
No, that's okay. And so
Good.
then Michelle, just in terms of anyone wanted to see it, I did pull up the statute number and I can't find it now. Oh, it's 16 VSA 724. I'm not sure, Wendy, if you want to capture that in the notes. That is the Vermont statute that refers to the dissolution, well, not the dissolution, the withdrawal of a school district from a unified union school district. And that's the language that Michelle's pertained to. That language clearly indicates that the wording refers to the town, the city, or municipality as the one to conduct that vote. And this is why it pulls the action steps away from the board, basically. So it's just kind of one of those things that's enumerated in statute, if you're interested in looking at that.
Yep. Even the legislature can't anticipate the future and figure everything out ahead of time.
Okay, look, we're getting a whole lot more money in our yield from December to now. So you're right.
Wendy, I see your hand up. I'm going to jump you to the front of the line because it probably has to do with our minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy, I just want to confirm, you said 16 VSA 724?
Correct. That is a statute that pertains to the withdrawal from a unified union school district.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Sean.
Yeah, so 3 things. First of all, I want to compliment Michelle on the amount of energy and time she's devoting to this with the Communication Council. It seems really impressive trying to pull everything in all within parameters you can pull in. The second one is, my second comment is, in 27 days, this will be all over. So it's not very much time. And the third is a question, and that would be, the 2nd of March would be our normal board meeting for the WSESD. And that is the town meeting vote, the ballot vote. So the polls will be open theoretically. I mean, I think most people would do it absentee. But the polls will be open until 7 o'clock on the 2nd. So I was just kind of wondering if anybody's thought ahead to the next WSESD meeting.
Jamie?
Hi, this is Jamie Comtois, Putney Central School. And I'm a parent. I'm also a part of the Communications Council. And one of the questions I had, I heard you discuss this at the last board meeting, but I wanted to just confirm. My hope was that we would hear or have a couple questions we could ask principals and educators about their experiences before and after the merger. And I also had reached out to the Equity Committee to see if there was a way to do any objective kind of reporting out that could be shared out to the towns about some of the equity goals that we had with the merger, and just, what can be reported at this time. So some of my goals or hopes were that I'm wondering just if we could approve some of, moving ahead with some of that so that we can bring that back into the conversation, that people who are in the building working with the kids would have a piece that would be really crucial to informed community discussion.
Yeah, I have that. I kind of skipped over that and left it out of my notes for now, only because it's though, like, us reporting back on matters of equity and things is sort of selling a point in one way or another, and it's starting to step out. I mean, this is just in today, really analyzing again that language of we can share facts about the dissolution vote, and where would that come in? Unless it's asked of us. I think if the towns wanted to have some information to report back because they're responsible for the public informational hearing, that would be good. If the leadership councils are seeking information, I would love to be able to support it. I'm just still trying to watch our backs and understand the parameters. I don't know that it's something we could put on a flyer and that we distribute. I think it could be, those are good questions that should be asked. And I'm hoping that leadership councils, that school specific sites will take up this conversation. It's happening very quickly in a short time, and people are just starting to hear about it and not even necessarily understanding what is going to be on the ballot. I've heard misinformation about what they're voting on. So, if David or Andy has any feedback on that, I don't see that there's space about where we would be distributing that information from the Communication Council perspective, because it's not, but go ahead, you chime in and tell me your 2 cents. Go ahead, Jamie.
Just to clarify, I understood what you were saying. I was saying that we have done that research. We've, checked in with our principals, and that it's on hand when asked. That we've done the work.
I'm with you. I'm happy to work, having it ready to go. Absolutely. And I don't know that we'll be able to get feedback from principals, but I think independently, I know Kelly Diaz had talked about maybe creating like an objective survey. It's just really starts getting really fuzzy and complicated on what is within this committee's role versus what people just have the right to talk about. I don't know, David, do you have any more input?
I think the main thing is that, I mean, obviously people can talk about whatever they want as individuals, but if doing surveys or opinion polls or asking people to give their perceptions of things, It's not objective. It's by definition not objective. And there is, the biggest problem is that there is no objective information available. No one has done any follow-up. No one established benchmarks before across the state, before districts merged. So there'd be something to, a starting point to compare with. No one has done any follow-up, any sort of cohesive follow-up in terms of changes in any dimension, educational, fiscal, geographic, buildings closing, staffing, none of that. No one has done anything. So there's just no objective factual information available. So people are left pretty much where they are in the first place. Either they think that it's better to have a local board, or they think it's better to have a centralized board. And that's really where we are. There just is no objective information, not even a starting point to compare. Andy, directly, go ahead.
Yeah, no, David, I think to follow up to your point too, is that many of the articles across the state were written in such a manner that they really, prevented any level of, because of the way the act was rolled out. I mean, there was a transition time to even think about school reconstitution or redistricting, or those articles, or those things that were taking place. And so to reinforce David's point, having that objective data about what were the things, and we can point to a few things at the SU level where costs have been reduced from the administrative side when we went from 7 budgets to 3, and from a smaller auditing fees. But in this grand scope of a $50+ million budget, those are kind of relatively small numbers. And so I think, just again, I don't mean to go on too long, but just to reinforce what David said, the way the articles had been written really would have prevented much of that kind of, let's find a timeline to do so. And so having that information will be difficult. And so you would be basing things just upon opinion.
Thanks, Andy. Jackie.
Thanks, David. 2 quick questions. One, I believe you mentioned that if the board wanted to take a position, we could do that. So I wondered how we would do that, and if we would have to come to a unanimous agreement.
I think, as with anything, someone would have to present a motion. It would have to be warned on it wouldn't be this meeting. It would have to be warned at the next meeting or a special meeting. And it would have to be moved and seconded, and we would vote. And there's no requirement for unanimity on any motion. It's majority rules.
Thank you.
Emily.
So my question was, Jackie just brought up an interesting question, and I have a follow-up to that. But first things first was when, Michelle, when you said that if the towns requested information at their forums, we would then, that's the time when we would come forward, I guess, and give information. Were you meaning that we would be giving information that was from this objective FAQ sheet? Or you're saying that somehow we would have collected, like individual towns or individual schools would have collected some survey data or something? I was a little, not that you're maybe you don't know either, because it's just we're all evolving this at the same time, but I'm looking to you for.
Yeah, no,
nice job.
my kids are like, where have you been? I've probably put 100, like, I'm not exaggerating, 100 hours into this in the last 2 weeks, just going through statute and trying to understand, and especially coming into Vermont a little after the fact, just catching up and talking to old people who are on smaller boards and our own staff. So I'm doing my best to understand the big concept. But I think, I had reached out to each of the towns to just let them know that that we're here, there wasn't even the towns weren't even all clear on that this was their responsibility. They assumed this was a school board issue. Some of them, there's some misunderstanding about who would be representing this information, and it's not the school board. So, I had just reached out to offer to collaborate with them with any support, if there's a way that we could support them. I personally, as a board member and a citizen in my town, would be happy to help them get information. Something like, if the question of equity, I was going to reach out to you and just ask if, I know that the Programmatic and Equity Committee did a great presentation. That was sort of our foundation of how do we even begin the assessment process. And so I was thinking about that, and then the beginning of this addressing, gender inequality, and was going to say, could you just have a few sentences on what this committee's done? And it would probably be a good thing to have on hand in case leadership councils are looking for that information. It's just, I'm pretty sure that's going to fall out. That type of information will fall out of what the communication council can present to the community, because it's not really about the vote itself. It's presenting information that voters should take into consideration. Absolutely. But it's not, we're not advocating for the vote. We're just providing basic information about, again, like, what am I voting for? What does this mean? What are the measurable impacts that can be considered? Not whereas, something about how did that equity line work out? Have we made any improvements? Is a personal question that's asking for different types of information. So I don't know. I'm rolling with it.
One other question too, but I'll just follow up. So perhaps the PPC, which will be meeting next week, it may be good for us to put on the agenda just to have thought through this in case we're asked.
Stay with the things that we know are going to change and aren't going to change. And to go beyond that, the other thing we got was the opinion from the opinion. I'm going to read what he said. He did not advise anyone going from the board to speak individually at a town select board meeting. The aspect of communicating as a private citizen was discussed, but it is often difficult for the audience to detangle that information. So it's really advice, not so much a legal opinion, but his advice, which we should certainly take into consideration.
Thank you. And my second question is actually, Jackie brought it up, and then, it made me think, is it, I guess I'd love to hear from other people too on this. It wouldn't be tonight, but it does seem like, we're going to give information about the dissolution, but since this is an issue that very much affects the school board, I mean, it's highly political also, so maybe people don't want to do this, but it does strike me that, is it our role to vote and give people advice on what we think is best as, the directors on the school board? I don't know if other people have opinions, and Jackie brought it up, so maybe she's thinking maybe we should vote. I don't know. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I do think it's something maybe we should decide on if we're going to vote or not in the future.
Thanks. Liz?
Yeah, so I've heard, sorry, my dogs, I've heard it twice. At the last meeting, David, you had said that principals should not be doing surveys or anything like that. Is that still stand? Because I've heard this idea come up twice about principals doing a survey.
I think it's hard to say what we decided or what we talked about. I reviewed the video, and I still wasn't quite sure. I think there is a concern about administrators playing a role that advocates one way or the other or has that effect. And again, our focus is everybody has their opinion. They can do what they want. If teachers want to survey each other and put out a public statement, that's absolutely fine. Whether principals should do that or not, I don't think that's our decision or my decision. I wouldn't recommend it, but I don't know that we could necessarily say you can't do it. But what we can say, and say again, is that it better be factual. If it's people's opinions or people's impressions or people's speculations, it's not objective, it's just opinion. And it needs to be presented that way. If you say, well, we polled the teachers, well, what was it? Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on that.
Yeah.
I just want to comment on that. Oh, sorry, Liz.
Go ahead.
So I was just going to comment on that because it came up briefly in our meetings because that issue was raised, and besides people have freedom of speech. It's our principals are an important part of our outreach to our community. We rely on them to help get out the vote on budget, to communicate information back to their school communities. So I think that we need to be consistent in that, and that it's really not, I think expressing our concerns and our expectations is reasonable, but being mindful that you can't change the rules for how different things. I mean, we've been using our administrators to support outreach, to have people show up and vote, and to help support information on things like budget. I don't know. It's a tricky place to be. I would anticipate professionalism from our administrators, and it to be questions led by their community. That's sort of my 2 cents on how I would approach it. But I do think that the public, they do want to hear, they want to know what their teachers are thinking, and what do the teachers think? What do the principals think? I mean, those are just kind of what's going to happen to my kid and how much it's going to cost. If we could just answer those questions, it would be easy, and we might not need to come up with all this other information. But
well, Michelle, the reason that came up in the first place was because you weren't here, but with the merger that was proposed to us, we had some principals highly promoting that, saying, yes, we should merge. Yes, we should merge. So and these principals most of them are all still here. So in my mind, I'm questioning whether they can be neutral and not be, telling their staff, oh, we shouldn't unmerge, or, whatever. So for me, that's a huge issue. I get what you're saying about, how we rely on them, but I also know what history was in this district. So that's why I'm cautious about having principals either design a survey or interpret to their community what this is about. It raises, red flags for me all over the place, and I wouldn't like to see that happen again.
Yeah, I think what the attorney said really gets at that. It's difficult for the audience to detangle the information that's someone's opinion from their position. And just, principals need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of that. We can't tell people what they can say or can't say, but we need to be aware that people see us and assign a meaning to that may or not be there, when what we're doing is giving our opinion on what we think about governance, because we don't have evidence one way or the other on which of these things is better. It's all about opinion at this point.
And I would just add that leadership council meetings, working with the leadership council, that would be just a great way to have balance. There's board representation, there's staff representation, community, teachers, and parents, and their school principals are on the leadership council. So it's a great strategy to be, have information sessions and to talk and have a balance being represented, and check and balance is good. So
thank you. Okay, we're getting into the second round of comments now, so I'd like to ask people to try and keep their comments really concise, under 2 minutes, please. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I actually just would like a clarification. You twice, Mr. Chair, have read from something that was from an attorney, but I didn't hear the attorney's name, and also I didn't know about what the material was.
Yeah, it was. Andy, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was asked for some legal advice, and I shared that, and it was Sean Toohey from Lynn Law McGinsky. And I shared that information with David and Michelle, because it was around a couple different things that it kind of brought up, mostly through information for the Communication Council. So that's where the language came from. And so that was my summary of my conversation with Sean, with, is it Barrister Esquire, Attorney Toohey?
And I can send that out to everybody too. It's not a secret. It just came late in the day. Ruby.
I guess I would just ask, it's been really helpful to hear this conversation. I don't know how many other leadership council representatives are here. I'm sure the board is going to be bringing it back to them, but because of the nature of this being so time sensitive, I think it'd be really nice to have very clear direction and language around what is okay and what is not to say. Have it communicated to administrators and chairs of the leadership council. I say this because, you know, Putney is going to be having a forum and it's run by the town, and I have every intention of showing up, and I'm going to encourage my leadership council to show up. And I assume someone from the school board will be there. So I don't want to step in something by saying something that will be outside of the parameters of what you're talking about. And it sounds reasonable. It sounds like there's a very clear, you know, if you're speaking from the point of being on the leadership council or the board, because if we're a subcommittee where we have to follow those rules, you're not speaking X, Y, and Z opinion. So I guess I just ask that the board be very clear about communicating that to the various constituents.
I'm pretty sure that the Communications Council will talk about that. Just off the top of my head, I think the best advice is to do what if you were a member of a board or an organization writing a letter to the editor or something like that, that you would have a disclaimer saying that I'm a member of this board, but I'm speaking only for myself. Identifying yourself as a member of the leadership council, and then saying, not saying this is my opinion, it implies that you represent that. It's a caution that you have to take. Yeah, I encourage people to take if you're going to be giving your opinion.
And I would just chime in too, Ruby. It's something that I've been thinking about because I have questions I can't get to the answers of, but I would like to hear someone weigh on, and it's not, I have too many other things going on. But just also, you know, reaching out to your select board. I'm not sure, again, you know, this came in at the final hour, and it's not clear what criteria constitute a public information meeting. If their answer is just, I don't know the whole time, does that count? But just kind of letting them know what information you'll be seeking, you know, could only serve everyone better, so that people are as prepared as possible to support with information.
Jamie.
I wanted to ask if there was a way that Andy knew of, you know, a question that could be asked of principals and teachers. So we had a sense of what's going on in the building in a way that, I realize this is probably a wish and a dream, but it takes it as much out of our opinion and says, are there these tangible, have you seen tangible examples of how things have changed or something? So I was trying to think of, is there an objective question that could be asked of staff? Because as somebody who has my own opinions about all this based on my own personal experiences, it would be wonderful to know that we had a mechanism to check in with folks working with the kids.
I think, Jamie, I think it's hard to say. I would, you know, we can point to fact. I mean, I think of, since July, I've probably spent 100 hours or more in meetings with our elementary principals and our secondary principals, both together as a group and away from as a group as we've planned for reopening of the schools. I know that the teams themselves, especially the elementary principals who had never really worked together as a group before, had met together several times. But again, as David's noted out, noted tonight, many of that's also, it sounds speculative, but it's also based upon a different context that we've worked very, very closely together throughout the pandemic. And those are structures we would see in place if this were a merged district. But remember, the district was in place essentially from July 1 until that fateful day on March 15th when things were shut down on that Sunday, and then everything went remote. So it's hard to have an objective conversation because our lens right now has really been pulled together through much of working together in this COVID world, and so many of the other things that were placed in the articles of agreement were really not prevented doing longer term planning work, but those were things that wouldn't manifest themselves for a couple of years more at the latest. I do think that there's a sense where the collaborative online schools, the teamwork that's taken place, those are facts that can be pointed to of more meeting time has been spent around that and as different groups. But I don't know if that really captures the true sense of where things would be either. And I'm trying not to be Switzerland too much in this.
Switzerland's a good place to be.
Yes.
Thanks, Andy. Jody?
Hi, Jody Normandeau from Dummerston. I just have one comment or concern right now. There are several members on this board who were on other boards before the time happened, before the merger happened, and who also were against the merger. There are other people in the public here tonight who are also worked very hard to not merge. And of course, the towns all voted overwhelmingly not to merge. But some of these people are also on the LCs. And so are we tying, or are you tying everybody's hand who really somebody could say, well, how do you feel? You were on an individual board and now you're on this board. How do you feel? Is this tying these people's hands? I don't know. And that's just my question, David. Thank you.
I don't believe so, Jody. I tried to be, and thanks for asking that, because I can say it again. And the more times I say it, the better. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. If you are a member, if you are affiliated with this board, it will be important for you to separate your membership with the board from your opinion. You can't just say, somebody said, oh, well, I was on this committee, or I was on this board, or somebody said you were on, like you just phrased it, you were on all these things. What do you think? You should, and they ask you, you should say, well, my opinion is, my personal opinion is, and go with that. I mean, but not represented as this is what the board thinks, or this is district policy or anything like that. It's just important to say, this is my opinion, because that's exactly what we're all going to be saying, because there's really nothing else we can say. Kelly.
So I had a personal opinion about the process before, during the vote for the merger. And then I've gone through this whole process being on the multiple boards, the transition board and this board. And I don't know where I fall in my previous opinion. It may line up with it, it may not. I mean, I have questions, and I wish there was a way that we could have that the board could ask some questions, maybe coming from the board, about, I would like to know how if this merged board is how it's seen by other people, by the administration. And I wish that, I mean, it sounds like that's a difficult thing for us to get some answers or responses, and I don't know whether it is possible, but is it possible for the board to come up with some questions and have those questions be asked? I mean, I would like to know from the administration, from different people, how they feel that it's that whether the board has been responsive or not responsive, or if it's been whether it's even worth it for them, or does it overcome their previous concerns or their previous opinions or whatnot. Maybe it wouldn't sway my personal opinion. I don't know. Maybe it would or wouldn't sway if the board was to vote on it. Maybe it would or wouldn't sway what the overall outcome of that. But I would, if there was some way of having the board come up with some questions, I would love to have some questions to ask.
Thanks, Kelly. Ann?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm afraid that whatever other decisions that we make, I must point out, we have no basis for comparison. None. We spent a year putting a merger together And since then, we've been in a global pandemic. Comparing what has happened since the merger to the way it was before is not possible. And any changes that we have made that we find positive, we can retain. However, again, when we're asking about opinions between what it was like before and what it is now, we have no real basis for comparison. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. Michelle?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Kelly. You know, I'm just thinking that we got information back that the board can have discussions about it, you know, among ourselves. We can't, you know, we're not in a position to host an informative session or forum for the public, but we can have our own conversations. And it might be a nice opportunity to identify answers to some of the questions that might, you know, I'm concerned about questions that might not come up out of voters' minds, thinking about things like capital plans, or how does my town finance repaying back the SD if we leave, you know, just being able to have these conversations, and if people want to come and be part of that or listen, it would be kind of nice. But, and also, you know, and the other side of this too, I would have anticipated this question coming up. I totally would have anticipated it in a district that was a forced merge. And so, you know, if it only takes one town to vote against ratifying the vote to silence this today, it doesn't mean that we can't vote on it again. So I would hope that if there aren't any changes that happen with redistricting as a result of this, that we would immediately address this and start, you know, implementing these assessments in ways that we can have measures of assessment and be accountable for this type of information. I think it's important. And if it doesn't go through, you know, short of you know, actually seeing statute change that closes those doors, I would anticipate that it comes up again in the future, and we should be better prepared for it.
Thanks, Michelle. Any last thoughts or comments before we go on to our next agenda item? Okay, thank you. Actually, we have no unfinished business. The next one is board brainstorm of future agenda items and grant requests. And I'm going to suggest that we table that. I heard from two people, and I think what I'll do is share that as a list with the board, and then people can write back and see if they want to add anything to the list or reinforce anything on the list, and then we'll talk about it at the next meeting. So I'll do a little bit more information gathering, if that's agreeable. I don't see any thumbs down. I don't know if we have that as an option. But, so we'll move on to public comment on non-agenda items. Is there any comment on non-agenda items? If you, Robin.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, I unfortunately wasn't at the meeting where you guys discussed changing to Tuesdays, but I was just wondering if anyone had brought up that this is the time when the Brattleboro Select Board meets, and that it creates a conflict for those of us in Brattleboro that want to be in participating or listening to the meetings as they happen.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, we decided to change the date so that we could keep the board intact. One of our members had a conflict that was unresolvable, and we looked at a few different options, and Monday was not possible, and I'm not sure if there were issues with Thursday, but Tuesday seemed to be the day that everyone would be available. So it is, we could consider changing to the 2nd and 4th so we wouldn't interfere with the town, but the town occasionally, as they have been in the last month or so, does have sometimes meets every Tuesday, particularly around budget time. So it's a matter of what's possible in terms of maintaining our board intact. Sean?
That was a good question. I did bring it up under the discussion of changing the night. And it is in the minutes. Wendy caught it, so it's definitely in the minutes. And subsequently, I've heard from a reporter who said it makes it difficult to have two meetings on the same night. So the board was aware of that to some degree when they voted in favor. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Any other not on the agenda information or questions? Okay, well, we need to have a hopefully brief executive session under Vermont 16, section 313, personnel issue. Could I will put, could I have a motion to go into executive session, please?
So moved. This is Ann.
Thank you, Ann. Second?
Second.
Okay, so we will enter executive session at 7:43. Give people a minute to move.
Who should we have down as having seconded it?
Oh,
Like
there's
four
a good
people
question.
seconded.
Yeah, who seconded it again? Please?
Seconded it.
Who was the second?
I was one of the people. so
Okay,
we can count.
Thomas moved by Ann and seconded by Thomas.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great. I'll put Wendy and Rich in the waiting room, and then we'll go into executive session. We will not be having any action after the executive session. So, Rich.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead. Good time to do it.
Did you vote on the executive session after it was moved?
No, thank you for the interruption.
You're welcome.
All in favor of entering, are so busy trying to get people into the waiting room. All those in favor of executive session, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye. And thank you, Wendy.
Yes. Any opposed? Great.
You're welcome.
The motion is passed. Okay. And the recording is resumed, and we are back from executive session at 8:12. Having taken no action. And I see Rich is recording and Wendy seems to be here.
I am here.
Thank you, great. So Ann.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
there being no further business before this board, I move that we adjourn.
And we made it over 2 hours once again. So much for a short agenda. Second, please.
Seconded.
Thank you, Thomas. Moved by Ann, seconded by Thomas to adjourn at 8:13. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, thank you again.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.